Everyone loves a giant arm, and the logic is often to do a lot of bicep curls to increase size. However, that's not necessarily true. Focusing on your biceps to increase size is kind of like the workout equivalent of a misnomer. What's far more beneficial to growing mass is actually focusing on the triceps. And this is because triceps are a bigger muscle group than the biceps. Triceps make up about 70% of the muscle mass on your upper arm, so focusing on them is going to benefit growth much more. And because of this, today we are talking about my favorite tricep move, the tricep dip. Now, since there's no single way to do these, I see a lot of people getting confused by what may seem like conflicting information. But in reality, they're just a great movement that have a lot of potential for diversity. So, sit up straight, like and subscribe if you're nasty, and let's get into it. The biggest source of confusion that I see regarding dips is that people can't decide if it's a tricep or a chest movement. And that's because they're both. But first, let's go over form. Because a dip is a compound push exercise that uses a lot of different muscles in the body. So we're going to start with keeping your shoulder blades down. When you're dipping, you want to refrain from keeping your shoulders close to your ears. So lowering your shoulder blades, make sure that you're putting yourself in the right position. Next, when you're holding yourself up, you want to be able to straighten your arms. But when I say straighten, I mean flex. I don't mean overextend. Personally, I find this really hard to communicate with just language, but you should feel a flex in your arm and not a locking position. If you can hold yourself up on the dipping machine or a bench and not feel any tension in your muscles, then that's probably a hyperextension, and you'd benefit from bending your elbows a tiny bit and flexing those arms so that you're carrying yourself and building muscle instead of just holding. Next, you're going to point your elbows backwards, just about at a 45-degree angle behind you. Don't flare your elbows out for the same reasons you don't want to flare your elbows out with a push-up. It puts too much pressure on the shoulders, which is bad for two reasons, because one, your shoulders are carrying a load that other muscle groups should be working with, and also you could be putting them in danger because of the specific range of motion that a dip has. Next, we're going to keep our spine straight. Again, this part's a little tricky to describe because there are aspects of a dip that will have you leaning forward, and that's totally natural. That's totally fine. However, what you want to refrain from is bringing your shoulders in, your neck forward, and giving yourself a hunch. So although there may be a lean, you don't want your whole body dipping down. Hopefully, if I'm not too lazy editing, Kevin will put in some examples of what I mean by that, but that's also asking me to not be lazy, and that is not a winning bet, folks. So next, you're going to lower yourself down to a right angle. When you're beginning, it's important to maintain control. And so what I'm saying right now is that you should be able to lower yourself down to a right angle as a minimum. That should be the starting point for what you associate as a good dip. However, if you're not a beginner, you should be accentuating the range of motion and getting as low as you can while your shoulder blades come together in the back, because it's going to give so much more tension to the muscle and you will get that much more out of the lift. It's important to note that not everyone has the same flexibility. So if you're unsure on how far you can go, or if you're nervous that you won't be able to hold yourself up, this right angle is exactly what you should be aiming for. But as time goes on, you should be working to improve that stretch so you can get lower and lower until you're dipping with the big boys. When my clients have a hard time getting low, I'll put a band on their knees so they can get deeper with more safety. But you can also use an assisted dip machine or a friend that you don't respect. Now, this is where people are getting confused in the comment section, because there are two factors that change the emphasis of the movement: arm placement and the angle of your body. Regarding the arm placement, when you're getting ready to do a dip, there's no wrong way to hold the bar. However, the wider your arms are, the more chest is going to be used, and the more narrow, the more of your triceps will be given attention. What sucks about this is that your ability to adjust your body is dependent on the tools that you're using. For instance, my gym only has one piece of machinery that allows me to do dips on, so I only have one predetermined factory setting to work with. Luckily, hand placement isn't the most detrimental thing to your dips when it comes to muscle focus, but I do still think it's an important thing to recognize. Maybe if you didn't know you were only working with one situation, you can go out and look for something else and see if you like the alternative. It's just something to think about. However, what matters a lot more to determining what muscle is getting the attention is the angle of your body. By moving your legs back and your chest forward, this is a dip machine, by the way, you're going to be giving more emphasis to your chest. Also, just as a side note, chest dips like these are fantastic for your lower chest, which is something that I find is pretty hard to focus on just regular chest days. So that's important to remember. Now, keeping your chest upright with your legs either straight or forward will focus all the attention on your triceps. Now, what I've seen people say is that you can also focus your chest forward and your legs forward to emphasize your chest. And that's true. However, I bring this up because I think people have the wrong mindset when they're teaching people how to do these. I see a lot of people focus on where to put the legs, but clearly the legs don't matter as much as where the chest is located. I think if you're focusing too much on where the legs are going, you might be just letting your chest fall wherever it goes naturally. What I'm trying to say with this tangent is that you should focus on what muscle group you want to use first, then associate where your chest is going to go, and then your legs can follow that trajectory naturally. I can think of multiple examples where chest and tricep dips are being done with people's legs in the front. The difference is their positioning from the waist up. But at the end of the day, a good dip is a good dip. And although I'm discussing different types of muscle emphasis, your chest, triceps, and shoulders are going to be involved in all of these options to some degree. And I touched on this before, but it's worth going over again. Dear God, don't rush through your dips. Dips are a lot like pull-ups in that they're really difficult and they rely on body weight, which causes people to want to rush through them. But the more you slow down and think about each muscle fiber expanding and contracting, the more you are going to get out of the movement and the faster your muscles will grow. Now, enough about that. We are moving on to bench dips. These are an easier version than elevated dips. However, they are kind of easy to up. And 90% of the time, I think it's because people's grip is setting them up for failure. Now, regarding form, it's very similar to an elevated dip. Hands shoulder width apart, elbows back, about 45 degrees. And you want to keep those shoulder blades down. Now, here's the important part. When you are gripping the bench, I want your fingers to hang off the edge and your thumb pointing forward. This is standard, but depending on people's posture habits, sometimes this position can bring people's shoulders forward. This position puts pressure on your shoulders socket and it's not doing you any favors. So if you're having trouble keeping your shoulders back, what I'd advise is to put your hands on top of the bench, rotate them to the side so that your thumbs are facing out away from you. This change in rotation is going to make it a lot harder for you to hunch over yourself. However, when you do this, just be careful because you won't have a strong enough grip. And if your hands are sweaty, then you could easily slip. So I'd advise doing this on a rag or wearing gloves. If you want these dips to be easier, bend your knees. If you want them to be a little harder, you can elevate your feet on a box or a chair. But I guess if bench dips are too easy for you at that point, I would just graduate to an elevated dip. Why not, you know? Now, last, let's talk about strength. Building strength in your shoulders, I think, is very difficult when you're first starting off. However, they are detrimental for your dip. If you're having trouble holding yourself up for a dip in the first place, what I have clients do are crab walks. Now, this is not an exercise for your triceps. It's a movement for your shoulders and core. But I think they're great for building muscles and building confidence in the positions that you need for doing a dip in the first place. Crab walk toe touches are great for mobility and warming up the muscle groups that you'll do before a dip. And they can also really help teaching you to not rely on the locked, overextended position when you're straining your arm. You know, just a cute little movement. She's doing her best and we love her for it. Pretty great. And on that note, fam, that is all I got. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you have any questions, put them in the comment section down below. I love interacting with you guys. Let me know what else you want to see me talk about. And in the meantime, like, comment, and subscribe because your boy loves attention. All right, fam, have a good one. I'll see you later.